question today. We have another presentation coming up next. I will try and get the institution affiliation correct this time. We have Dr. Malai Zaiteh Sheikh Abdul Hamid from the Center for Communication, Teaching and Learning at the University of Technology, Brunei. And we have Dr. Yaya Priya Kasniathan from the School of Business and Polytechnic, Brunei. So I hope that our two speakers are here and ready. Is that a yes?
Hi, good afternoon.
Oh, yes.
So my team. Yep, excellent. I make you a co-host now.
Alrighty, I will hand over to our new speakers. Welcome.
Hang on a minute, some technicalities, hang on a second. Okay, thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to everyone who's joined us today. Okay, so today the topic of my my presentation today is actually using technologies, using digital technologies and innovative platforms for online teaching during COVID-19 pandemic as the new norm. So let me just share my slide. Just give me a few minutes if I can share my slide. Okay, are you able to see my slide yet, or it's not sharing any slides at the moment? Okay, just hang on a minute. Share my screen. Okay. 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 Can you see my screen? Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Sorry, I'll just put my video on. Okay. All right. So so today I will begin by touching briefly on the current global crisis in education faced by the situation of COVID-19 pandemic. And I will move on to outline digital resources on online teaching, challenges with online teaching, and of course, traditional teaching and sharing some innovative platforms for online teaching. And from there on, I will also touch a little bit on some reflections on the effects and the current situation of COVID-19 faced by the education sector for Brunei. And I'm just going to move my slide for a minute. Okay. And my colleague, Dr. Jaya, will touch on challenges with online teaching. Okay. So just to begin with stating what's happened in currently, there's an unprecedented education crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know. So it's quite difficult to derive any insights from the past due to the fact that this is the first time such a major crisis has hit us. So last year, about 1.5 billion students in about 188 countries were unable to attend school. And some of them were able to go to schools with the assistance of alternative learning opportunities and support from their parents and teachers. Now, the education crisis has, of course, exposed many inadequacies and inequalities in the school system that we face. This includes things like broadband connection, poor broadband connection, lack of computers and digital devices to assist with online education. So in this sense, there's also every possibility that we will not return to the status quo or any matter soon, and things were unlikely to go back to normal past the pandemic. Now, 1 year after the pandemic has passed, many primary schools and secondary schools around the world are currently now fully open. We have about less than 33% of countries, 40% of 33 countries in the world globally have open schools, but they're still consistent and have constraints for learning, such that some countries make it very difficult to make choices whether they want to open schools or not to open schools. Now, school learning is very important for the early years in the direct contact because face-to-face teaching with teachers and educators are generally considered to be very, very important. So any kind of digital teaching alternatives, of course, are likely to be less effective. However, at the primary level, globally, some schools remain fully open, and this will include countries such as Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Korea, Switzerland, Turkey, and so forth. And there are also some countries such as Australia, Brazil, Denmark, England, Germany. Schools were officially closed also due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So in essence, many other countries as well, they have other reasons for closing. And again, the situation is very different. It depends on, for example, the seriousness of the stock increase and the continuing rise on the number of COVID-19 patients, rising from hundreds of thousands in matter of weeks or time. Now, let me reflect back on the situation for Brunei, because obviously I will be talking about how online teaching is being conducted in Brunei. Now, in Brunei, the cases were manageable during what we call the first wave of COVID-19. And that was last year in 2020 when this happened. And of course, the last known infected case that time was identified on the 7th of May, 2020. So that was the last known local case, all right? So it was for more than a period of 1 year. Brunei had enjoyed, you could say, a blissful, normal life, and we resumed business as usual. But somehow, things do change, turn of luck. So it's only recently that we hit the second wave of pandemic, which actually happened, unfortunately, on the 7th of August, 2021, which is so recent. And that 8 new local cases were identified within the community. And because of this, the Brunei government had no choice but to take immediate action to react. What do we do now? Because this is the second time it hit us, we had been very happy, So this meant that the Brunei government had to take control of the situation. So this led to quick of closing of schools. Now we have workplaces are now open. Some are now not allowed to open. We're working from home. Many government agencies, private sectors and government sectors, we're all now working from home. And that is actually the norm now. We had to work from home. We have no choice. Because even as we speak now, cases are unfortunately rising, and it continues to rise. Not too bad, but it still continues to rise, and it's not yet slowing down as it is. So I will touch more on the mitigation strategies implemented by Brunei when we hit the first wave of the pandemic. That will be towards later on. Okay, now let me touch on how Brunei, for example, handle the use of digital resources for learning. So during school closures, of course, digital resources became the lifeline for education for many teachers and students in Brunei, because we had to adapt very, very quickly how to learn, how to teach online. Now, virtually all countries, of course, have rapidly enhanced their digital learning opportunities for both students and teachers, and they are encouraged to use, for example, new forms of teacher collaboration. Now, online platforms became very extensive for all levels of education, from primary to secondary to tertiary. And probably the most significant change is that mobile phones now are no longer just a device or tool for communication. It has now become an asset for online learning. And this, I have to say, is very true for Brunei. Mobile phones and digital devices are actually now more commonplace in Brunei. So I will touch on the context of Brunei and how we are using a lot of sending information through WhatsApping in Brunei. I mean, we do also have things like home learning packages, just like other countries. But in Brunei, there's an increased rise. And in fact, I would say generally, most teaching and learning is done through WhatsApp. And I will touch on this a little bit later. Now, moving beyond the pandemic, it's also important that we continue to monitor teaching and to address the needs of different students and to expand opportunities for quality education. So,
Zaiti, can I interrupt for a second? Are your slides working, or you're not using them at the moment?
Sorry, I think they are working. Oh yeah, sorry.
Oh, cool. Thank
I
you.
only have a few slides. Sorry, yeah. Thank you for that. I'm only using a few slides, so just a few slides. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. So the pandemic has also, I would say, complicated the administration of national examinations and assessment. So education system, including in Brunei, will now have to change, for example, the content and the mode of examinations and assessment. So in Brunei here, the situation is that we now currently are putting any formal examinations on hold. We were supposed to have our O-level examinations, oral exam sometime this month. But because of the situation that's happened now, we have decided to move that to a much later date and until it's been further reviewed by the Ministry of Education. So, and in the case of, I would say higher education, I'll give you one example of what my university is doing at University of Technology Brunei. We are not familiar with using or giving examination online. We haven't got to that stage that because we were not prepared. University Brunei Darussalam, of course, had better advantages than many of us. But at UTB, currently, the choice of the university or the institution is to go fully on 100% full assessment. So continuous assessment is what my university have decided to do now. So all of us now, despite that we have examinations towards the end of the semester, we now have to change and modify our curriculum. So now we have to make sure that it will be suitable to fit to go for 100% assessment, continuous assessment, which means we have to change quickly. Any form of assessment which we had, for example, I had my assignment 60% examination based. I had to turn to different strategies. For example, I have to give quizzes now, something that can be a testing bed, for example. I had to give online quizzes. I have to give structured question. So now I have to sit down and with my colleagues to sit down and how to make it fairer to give the student the 60% they deserve, because the 40% have been reserved for continuous assessment. 60% is supposed to be exam based. But at UTB, we are not prepared. So the idea is now to change everything to 100% assessment. And now we're using that as the way to examine, assess our students. So it is very tough for many of us who are still, learning the ropes. All right, so now I'll also move on to talk about the transition to full online learning. Okay, but before that, I just want to touch a little bit on sort of a comparison between traditional learning. When I say traditional, what we're doing now, what we're doing before, face-to-face in the classroom, and online learning. So in essence, if you compare the two methods, there are so many advantages of being in a classroom rather than a virtual classroom. And I think one of the most important elements is the human factor that I believe that we do not have when we are doing online teaching. And I can give you the example of what I go through my students when I teach during virtual environment. They come into the classroom, my virtual classroom, I let them in, they wait into foyer, and of course I use different platforms. The two most common platforms that we use are Zoom and of course Microsoft Teams. I must mention that in Brunei, across the whole state, every government officer have been assigned an email attached with Microsoft Teams. So in other words, that is the official government platform for sharing information and emails between one government officer to the next. So Microsoft Teams is the one that the government have invested on, and we are all now, most of us have access to Microsoft Teams for our teaching learning, for our conferencing, for our sharing information, for our meetings. Everything's now done on Microsoft Teams. Zoom is another option, of course, if you choose to do so. So these will be considered as the two most viable options that we use in UTB and in the government. I will also share that there are others, of course. In Brunei, there are other video conferencing platforms that the government have recommended us to use. And in fact, these four, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom, and WebEx, have actually been put into the government official sharing site, which is Telegram. Okay, so Telegram is actually officially the Brunei government information platform to share between the public and the locals, right? The public and the government. Sorry. So these four platforms have been put into, especially into Telegram, and it's been shared throughout Brunei. So to remind us that these four, you have to meet the safety guidelines for each of the platforms if you use this in your teaching. So again, I'd say that I can confirm that this is what we've been using. All right. Now let me go back again. So to go back to my example of my students, now what they felt about the traditional way of teaching, which is in the normal classroom, and which we always call as talk and talk, yeah. And of course, the platform where we're doing video conferencing and using learning management system. So for me, live broadcast, or the face-to-face element is very much missing in online teaching, because you see, students are all human beings. They face a lot of issues. Being a young person, not being able to be talking to their friends, communicating, the human factor. In communication, we are people. We are human beings. We need the human factor. Now with online teaching, this is very, very hard to do. And it can be very depressing. It can be very motivating. And
It's 3 o'clock.
it is hard for students to face. And these are the complaints I've heard so far from my students, that miss, we miss coming to school, we miss driving to university, we miss talking to you, we miss going with our friends, and they miss all those elements. And you see, these are the things that the online option will never give us: the human factor, the fact that we can talk to each other, we can reach out to each other, we can talk to a friend, we can have coffee and tea, you know. So that has in some sort of psychological effect to my students, because they feel tired, they feel fatigued. And something that we recently felt was something new that's going on now. They've called it there was a term used, technological, I forgot the term, but technological stress, that's it. It's now commonly used around now as the technological stress. And I've heard this many times mentioned in many meetings with other colleagues. So they're now facing technological stress. So these are the things that we can expect because of online learning. So I feel for my students, and I wish there's something we can do for them, but until we can mitigate the situation, I believe there's not much any of us can do. All right, so I'll move on from that. I just want to show a few quick examples. You know, when I see my students, this is what I see. You know, I could see their faces, they're happy because they're happy to see me, because what I can do to compensate for the loss of being with them physically, you know, being with them. So I try to simulate a situation where I can still make it feel so real for them. And I'll give you one example already, because I teach communication in class. I teach them, for example, role play, communication. Now I said, okay, guys, boys and girls, let's do something fun. Why does online teaching have to be boring? So one of the activities for the assessment is to have to do an assessment based on role play. So I told them, why don't we do something different? Rather than dress up as you are, let's put something fun on to simulate as real as possible. So I told them, next week in your tutorial session, let us dress up in the class. Meaning, I told them to we'll pick a team. Say we're going, for example, today we're going with an Indian team, or a particular, maybe not Indian, but maybe a particular book like Harry Potter. Let's all dress up with a prop of Harry Potter, and let's do that in class. Why do you need to make it so boring? So bring a hat, bring a wand, you know, something to simulate, something that makes it so real for them. They feel they're communicating with me, you know. So these kind of activities are small activities, but I think it matters the most for them. And our activities are coming up next week, where they'll find a costume of their choice. They'll pick one theme and will dress up for the occasion, you know. So I think that makes them, it takes off some pressure from them, but at the same time, it's for fun, because young people enjoy fun. If you see the pictures, they want fun, and they should not be deprived because of online teaching. So that's me sharing my bit on online teaching. And of course, the other things that we also use at my university is that for video conferencing, we've used Microsoft Teams, we have used Zoom, but for learning, for assessment-wise or for activities, what can I use? So the most convenient way is for University Brunei, Technology Brunei, we use this one, which is called Moodle, and I think many of you are familiar. So Moodle is also another way for me to engage with my students, because I give them a range of activities. What I can do is I provide them information, and I provide them with some guidance as they go to Zoom, as they go to LMS. So if I have an activity to show, I'll put in my LMS and of course the Moodle, and I could put it right there into the task. So I can tell them to design whatever they like. I could design an activity where they have to do the poster, and I post it, and then they can read all the instructions. So that would be like you could say the online, or perhaps the learning which takes place on your own time. So this is what they can do for me. And whenever I want assignments from them, they send all the information back to me via Moodle. So this is how we have been doing it at my university, and so forth. To take on in Brunei, another case for University Brunei Darussalam, they're using Canvas, and it's the same thing as well. It's a different platform. All right, so I'll move on to the next one. Okay, so that's talking about higher education. Now, if we want to touch about Brunei generally in primary and secondary, they also use different assessment tools in online teaching. And I've asked a couple of friends, colleagues here and there, and got some information from them. These are apparently some of the more common platforms they've used for online teaching in Brunei. Okay, this is more relevant to primary and secondary education. For higher education, we are looking on the one on the right. Okay, so Google Forms, document. Kahoot, Slido.com, Quizlet, even screenshot, and I'll tell you more about this in a minute. Google Classroom, emails, and photos. You might be curious about how does WhatsApp work as an assessment tool? And I was also very curious because I don't teach primary and secondary. So when I ask more questions, this is what the teachers do in Brunei. Because they know that the students sometimes do not have access to a phone. A child will not have a phone. So what they do is they screenshot the activity and then they send it to the parents. They will set up WhatsApp group with the parents. So if I teach one class, I will have 3 WhatsApp group with 3 different groups that I teach in a WhatsApp group. And then I'll send information to the parents. So I will need to know the name of the phone number of the parents where I can then disseminate information. So if I were to send out any information, the teachers then have to send them, the parents then have sent it back to me, to the teacher, and they can take a picture and send it back to WhatsApp, right? So that's I would say, a very innovative way of transferring information to students, because children at young age do not have a phone, so we only have access to the parents. So why don't use that to the parents? Give them activities and do it via WhatsApp. And emails are also another platform, but parents are not so keen to use emails because the fastest way or convenient way to reach them is obviously via WhatsApp, because everybody's on the phone, everybody's texting. In fact, in Brunei now, every time we go in and out of places, we have to scan via a Blue Health, via an application for our health. So everybody must have a phone. It's almost compulsory that we need a phone. All right. So those are some of the sharing of online teaching that's done in primary schools and secondary. Whereas on the left, this is more applicable to higher education institutions. Okay, so an example of this is what I do for my students when I have WhatsApp. I will also send a sort of activity, send it to them, and I give them direct feedback straight away, because I also put them in a group. It's easy for me to talk to them, and I'll have to save all their names, but I keep them during the time that I teach them. As soon as I don't see them, then I'll tell them to leave the group. So in a way, it's a recycling of names, so that I don't clog up my phone, if you could say. But, and you see an example of the students asking me feedback. And this one will go to everyone in the group. If I have 30 students, all 30 will receive the same message, so I do not have to share one information to one person. It's been set up straight away to all 30 in the group. So WhatsApp is for us very, very convenient. So let me move on now, and I'm going to pass to my colleague in a couple of minutes. Okay. So I'll end my presentation now, and before I pass on to my colleagues, just to share with you what's happened in Brunei recently. Okay, so these are the 4 things that's happened recently in Brunei. Okay, so 9th of August 2021, there was a change of school of terms and holidays. Okay, hold on just a minute. Okay, and then on the 10th of August 2021, there was full online teaching for schools and institutions. On the 14th of August, we had the work from home plan, depending on the business continuity plan for government and private sector. And on the 14th August to the 4th September, we had the first control measures and restriction implementation for all Bruneians to work from home. That was just last week, and it has now further moved on to another one. It's been extended to the 3rd of October 2021. So it's very, very unfortunate that we had to go through this again. So next one is just to share. Pretty much in Brunei, there were also several strategies that we had to do, and this was, we had something called the, let me just move the screen. Can you see my screen? Yeah, we had 4 levels of, 4 levels of, okay, 4 levels of metrics of de-escalation stages. This was when Brunei went back to normal. So the only way that we could go back to normal was when we went to full operation, when we reached the stage 4, after having gone through all the outbreak. So this is to remind everybody that we did go through a difficult stage of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, 4, and 5. And we had this fully operational before we could go back to normal. So these are some of the things that Brunei had to do in order to ensure that Brunei goes back to normal, specifically under the directive of the Ministry of Education. Okay, thank you very much. So without further ado, now I'd like to hand over to Dr. Jaya, so for her to continue sharing her screen. Dr. Jaya, the screen is yours. She will talk about the challenges of online learning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Zeti. So good afternoon to all, and greetings from Brunei. I am Dr. Jaya, and I will take you through the second part of the presentation, where we will look at some of the challenges that we faced during the first lockdown that we had using online teaching. So let me just share my screen with you. Okay, are you able to see the screen? Hi, good afternoon. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So as I've said, I'm going to go through some of the challenges that we faced when we first had our lockdown. So this is more of a little qualitative survey that we did, and the responses that we got. So we put in little in appropriate themes. Okay, so let's see what the lecturers from Brunei actually faced. Okay, so now the first thing that they said was, sorry. Okay, so when we asked them what was your experience or what's the challenges, so it was initial discomfort and lack of familiarity. See, because none of us at that time had an experience of teaching online, at least in the Brunei perspective. So, you know, as for me, I can still remember my head of department came and said, okay, from tomorrow we are going online. So we all had to scramble and find ways to, how do we do this, So if I would choose a word, I would say it was a daunting experience for many. Because, as what some of them have said here, teaching online for the very first time made me feel so nervous because I lacked experience. They're all very good at their own, subjects. They've been teaching for so many years, but when they have to use a new technology and they have not been trained to do so, especially trained to do so, and you're not an audience, you're actually the one who is delivering. So this really was daunting to many of them. Also maybe losing control of the class because you're teaching to a group of youngsters who probably know more than you, to use such technologies. So that was pretty difficult for them in the first time. I mean, if you would ask them now, I think many of them are more confident to use such kind of platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teaching and so on. I do remember from my experience, what I had first started, because I really didn't have time. So I started with Google Meet, because that was, I think, the easiest. Everybody had Google and you had, Meet there. So you just find the link and share it with your students through WhatsApp. So that was pretty easy. And I also remember sharing it with some of the senior members of the faculty, because they were really like, how do I do this? Okay. So the next theme is feeling stressed and pressured. Okay. Obviously, when you are unfamiliar with using something, of course, you're feeling stressed and pressured. Okay, some of the comments given was, the flow of class may not be as expected. Basically, because, okay, we talk about connectivity, right? So at that time, I mean, even now, your class is supposed to start at 8. Okay, so you go there at 7:50, all of a sudden you don't have connectivity. So what happens? There is a disruption. So when there is a disruption, what's going to happen is your class is going to be delayed. If you're lucky, in your students do not have another class after that, you can just carry on. But if they do, then you have to reschedule your classes and then find ways and means to finish up those portions. And if they are exam-going students, this becomes more pressurizing. Okay, also the issues of not having or having the microphones or the webcam not working at that time, it's really very stressful. Okay, another thing that I would like to share is another pressure that some of the teachers actually or lecturers experiences. Some of us, okay, for us at least, when we had the first lockdown, it was 2 months before we were ending semester. So meaning to say, a lot of our KPIs are linked to module evaluation, student satisfaction, and so on. So if you are having this problem right before the end of semester and students are going to evaluate, now this may actually affect your performance. You know, and in performance management, you have something called recency biasness, which means that they remember what you just did, that you last did compared to what you have done previously. You would have done fantastic job, you know, from January, February, and all of a sudden you have this. So this was another added pressure to for lecturers. The third thing is, some of them said, especially teachers who are or lecturers who are teaching in the technical institutes, using online and going on chat videos or conferences is not applicable for all subjects. There are subjects that involve practicums like engineering and nursing. So when it comes to subjects like that, online learning may not be the best way to go. So of course, I think the best way would be having simulations and also AR, VR, where probably the institutions can have collaborations with some of the institutes that are doing this at the moment. Whereas, okay, the other theme that we saw was lecturers trying to maintain interest and enthusiasm. You know, like what Dr. Zeti said just now, it is not easy when you're doing it online, you know, so you are teaching on a device where the student can easily go to various websites. They could start playing games, they could start, you know, chatting with their friends. So the concentration, how do you keep the concentration? So as for me, I used to use Kahoot. I used to use Slido because it's integrated with PowerPoint. So with that, you know, so I can actually do post checks with them by giving them some quizzes or some open-ended questions, and then so this actually builds their interest. And also it's a way for the lecturers to make sure that the students are with you, you know, because if you just carry on without having these tools, then most likely you would have lost the concentration. All right. The next one is a very interesting one. I think a lot of us could attest to this. If you are, you know, teaching online for 4 or 5 hours in a day, which is fatigue. You know, you have back-to-back lectures and so on. Now, I would like to share something interesting. There is a group of researchers in Stanford University who have actually come up with this term called Zoom fatigue. Okay, so they've come up with this new scale called ZEV scale, which is a Zoom exhaustion and fatigue scale. So this scale actually measures your level of fatigueness when you're using, for example, like Zoom. So it looks into general fatigue, it looks into emotional fatigue, motivational fatigue, psychological fatigue. Yeah, so I think it'll be very interesting once this is up, because I think this is something that we have to address as well. You know, yes, having digital tools and technologies are definitely great to make learning interesting. If I were a student, of course, I'm not talking about pandemic time, but if I were a student, I would love to be a student at this era because it's so fun and interesting to be having all these digital technologies. But at the same time, there is other challenges that we actually face, yeah. And also, like, you know, strain on eyes. The lecturers did say this, you know, because you're looking. I mean, normally we look at the, you know, we look at the slide, we look at the notes. So our eye concentration is not just on one point, and also there's a lack of mobility. We are usually used to standing up when we give a lecture and so on, yeah. All right. And of course, from the lecturer's point of view, they also talked about time constraint because, you know, it is not just delivering a lecture, but it's delivering a lecture that is interesting, that is engaging. So therefore, you need to find various tools. There are so many tools out there, but of course, you need time to go and find what is most suitable, and you need time to actually dabble with it to see that you are good at using it and you can use it in your classroom. So that takes a lot of time compared to actually doing face-to-face. Yeah. Okay. So I move on to the challenges faced by the students. Now, I'm recounting the time that we actually started the lockdown and what were the problems that the students said. So some students talked about, you see, because lecturers at that time were using applications that they were most familiar with. So which means a student could attend a lecture where somebody was using Zoom, and then right after that go to a lecture where somebody is using Microsoft Teams, and then carrying it on with Google Classroom. So there was no real guidelines, that you have to use a particular kind of application or so. So this was a little confusing for them, perhaps difficult switching from one app to another. And of course, lectures, because I think when you do online, you have to really design the curriculum so well, because it's a different mode. We can't just, when you switch from face-to-face to online mode, there's a lot of things that you need to think. Yeah, so if you're going to have a 2-hour class, and so definitely students are going to feel distracted. I think Dr. Zeti also did mention that. Thirdly, lacking classroom and social environment. Now, this, of course, is a real challenge when we are getting onto online mode, because I think students, it's part of the whole academic journey, right? So like what Dr. Zeti said, getting up in the morning, going to your lectures, meeting their friends, so this whole social dynamics is actually lost. In fact, environment is actually very important when a student is picking the institution. Like, when a student wants to pick an institution for their higher learning, one of the factors they see is the environment of the campus, environment of the university. And if they like the environment, they may choose to study there. So now this whole thing is taken away from them. So it is definitely a challenge to bring this environment when you're doing online. Yeah. Next, of course, a very important factor, which is financial constraints. Now, an hour of Zoom lecture would cost, would take up about 800 to about 2 gigs. So which means they are constantly having to buy data. So I have students who actually call up and say that, Miss, we're running out of data. We need to, this is pretty expensive. So some of the things that they've suggested is, like, for mobile companies to come up with affordable student internet packages. For, of course, students who are in the public institutions, they have scholarships, but those in the private, this may be a problem. All right, and lastly, of course, hardware and software issues. Now, I think some people call it tech disparity, because not all students would have a very good laptop, and also the software that enables them to use whatever tools that the lecturers may be using. Okay. Secondly, when they are during the lockdown, like now, and everybody is online, so there may be big families. In Brunei, probably you have on average maybe three children per family. So you also have the parent who is also online mode. So you have to find, so this may be a problem. And also, I think the key issue here when we talk about digital technologies, online learning, the key issue here is really connectivity. Okay, so I think if you do not have good connectivity, then the whole essence of that online teaching, whether using digital tools or whatever that is lost. And this is both for lecturers as well as students. Okay, so I think some of you may be able to relate to some of the challenges that I've said. So I would like to end the session by saying, yes, we are all in a very challenging situation. Nobody has ever expected this to happen, but we are thankful for technology, because of the evolution of technology in education, that we are able to move on and have so many different tools that we can just carry on seamlessly. But at the same time, we also need to address what are the other challenges that is happening, so that we can have a win-win situation. So with that, I'd like to conclude the presentation. Thank you.